rather than measurement. But since this is about measurement, I should just mention a few things about measurement, right? We do have our usual census data, of course. We have our labor force survey. We also have a survey on senior citizens, and also we have our income trends, yearbook of statistics, things like that. That would enable you to get a sense of the quality of life in Singapore, and maybe from there also to estimate the extent of poverty, right? I also know for a fact that some of our ministries in Singapore have been quite concerned about low-income family. So there has been survey about low-income family living in those one-room or two-room flats. You know, in Singapore, that one of the indicators that we use to measure class or maybe even poverty is we look at house type, right? Because you know that 85% of Singaporeans live in HDB, right? Our housing and development, public housing. And so one way to find out where they are is to look at people who live in one-room flats, the one-room HDB apartment, and some of them are in two-roomers. So there have been surveys done on low-income family in those house types. And personally, for me, I'm also involved in a large-scale survey on social stratification in Singapore. The survey is not focused primarily on poverty or low income, but it's more of to get a sense of the general social landscape in terms of class and stratification. I also know that there have been data collected on people who are on public assistance, and afterwards I'll mention a few things about public assistance. Alright, look at my slides here now, and you notice that I have a picture of, this is East Coast, right, and you notice that there are a few tents there. I think the last year or the year before, right, there have been some discussion about the homeless in Singapore. And you know that in Singapore, the homeless, where do they live, right? They are not in the city. They actually set out tents in East Coast Park, and it's by the beach. And I'm not sure whether these people are still there, but if ever you need to have a visual image of the poor in Singapore, maybe the East Coast Park is one way to find them. Okay, let me move along to talk about the HDI and the other kind of measurement. Alright, I'm actually personally quite new to HDI. Alright, so before, when I was asked to do a presentation for this, I decided to take a look. And incidentally, in fact, when Anita invited me, I was about to go on the cruise, right? And you know, on the cruise, it's very hard to think about poverty. We have 3 or 4 meals a day, right? So, well, anyway, this is what I got from the web about HDI, right? So I think earlier there was already a mention that Singapore ranks 27, alright, with a score of 0.846. And I'm only comparing with those in the top segment, right? And you notice that in the top segment you have Norway, which has been in the news lately. It's number 1 and with 0.938, and then Japan 11. I'm just mentioning some of the countries in Asia, right? Japan 11. South Korea 12, and Hong Kong 21, and Singapore is 27 on this top segment of the HDI map. And I wouldn't talk about the dimensions, but this has been mentioned countless of times. And we notice, of course, that there are 3 new adjusted measures for inequality, gender inequality, as well as poverty. In fact, I want to emphasize here that maybe one of the inequality that we should look at would be age inequality. And I think Arif Ananta alluded to that, right? Because, I mean, if you look at countries like South Korea, Japan, and Singapore, in fact, there's a rapidly aging population. And so maybe right now, the HDI might look good, but if we factor in the age dimension, things might become quite different. And I think like 30 years from now, 50 years from now, I mean, could be half the population could be 60 years and above. And that would drastically affect HDI. So I think gender, of course, is important, but maybe age should be something that ought to be considered. And I noticed that some other measurements also tend to focus on children. So maybe this is a concern of less developed countries where the population is relatively young. But in the more developed country, the population is aging, and therefore maybe age ought to be factored in a lot more. Alright, my third point here is that, of course, we use the usual Gini coefficient, and then I think according to the HDI report, during the decade of 2000 to 2010, in fact, it was 0.425 for Singapore, as compared to 0.408 for US and 434 for Hong Kong. So it looks like Singapore is pretty high on this, right? In fact, even more unequal than the US, although less so than Hong Kong. Alright, now I'm going to just focus on some data on Singapore. This is the one that is not, we're not talking about the decade, but comparing two time points. The Gini coefficient rose from 0.444 in 2000 to 0.480 in 2010. Alright, this is according to the latest Department of Statistics data. And by Singapore, you notice that we also adjust for employers' CPF. This is the sort of our social security system, right? So if you add in what the employers is paying towards social security, then the adjusting it becomes much lower, okay? And then and then if you adjust for government benefits, it becomes I think does it get better? Okay, so 0.430, right, to 0.452. You know, I just want to compare, right? So you look at all those things that are in yellow, right? So the overall picture is 480, and then it becomes 472 and 452. So in other words, with some government benefits and taxes, it actually gets, the situation gets better. And I thought on the third point about government, you notice that in the government publication, right, the term they use is government benefits, it's not welfare benefits. And that says a lot about our welfare philosophy in Singapore. I think we try not to talk too much about welfare, and that is reflected in the government publication. Alright, my fourth number that I want to show here is that the ratio of the top 20% income to bottom 20% is 9.7 in the year 2009. So it's almost 10 times between the top and the bottom. Alright, let me show you also some other numbers on the income inequality in Singapore. Alright, this is the first two rows refers to the top, the bottom 20%, right? You notice that this is the kind of income we're talking about in 2010. The first result is 354, and the second one is 675. Alright, I don't think you need to know too much about these specific numbers, but I just wanted to compare with the bottom. Okay, maybe I should reverse the direction. The bottom and the top. Okay, and notice how different they are, right? And this also, if you were to measure the ratio or calculate the ratio, you'll find that it's pretty high, right? So at the top, you get people, household income is 23,000 as compared to say 1,004 in the bottom decile of the population. Okay, what about poverty? Alright, these are some of the measures, indicators that we have, right? Average household income in 2010 is 7,214, and median is 5,000. Alright, so in other words, 50% of household have less than $5,000 a month. Alright, this is not annual income, monthly income. And so I look at the World Bank data, and there's actually no data in Singapore. Anyway, let's move on. And we try to calculate the relative poverty, right? So maybe if we take it that 50% of median income will be poverty, that will be where the poverty line is, and that my estimate suggests that it's about 25% of households in Singapore will fall below the $2,500 household income. Alright, another indicator that I want to show is in terms of public assistance. You know, we don't give a lot of money, the government doesn't give a lot of money in terms of handouts, because there's a very strong anti-handout mentality in Singapore. Alright, so what the government gives is that, you know, for 2 adults and 2 children is 1350. So maybe this can be seen as the poverty line in Singapore. Alright, whereas my estimate is 2005, the actual could be $1350. My colleague from the LKY school, Professor Asher and then Mr. Nandish, suggest that the proportion of household that actually receive public assistance is actually less than 5%. Alright, so we may be talking about 25% here, but actually the people who are receiving assistance is only 5%. And you also went on to say that it's 5 to 8% of per capita income, which is what they're getting. Alright, I thought I'd just show some pictures here, right? If you're wondering what this picture is about, right? You know, this is actually taken from one of those one-room public housing apartments, alright? And then you find that, I call it the Great Divide because, okay, the river, should I call it a river? Actually, it's more like a canal, right? But it's called Singapore River, okay? The Singapore River is just right here. And you notice that it serves as some kind of a great divide. On one side, you have your one room, and right across the other side, you have your condominium and your expensive kind of apartment. So, just separated by the Singapore River. You know, I used to live in this apartment myself many years ago. Alright, so here is this guy overlooking, and you can see that over the other side of the river, things are very different. Alright, let me show you another picture. If you're wondering what this is, I think this has something to do with loan shark, right? This is actually the door, the wall next to the door of a one-room flat. And if you're wondering what this paint is about, I think they probably borrowed money, and the loan shark came and throw paint on their door, right? And on the wall next to the door. So money problems is another sort of visual sign of poverty. Alright, this is a picture of a child in a one-room flat, okay, where you find that everything is there. Maybe it's still a better quality than some slums you find in less developed country, but certainly by Singapore standards, it is not the best. Right? Maybe that accounts for why the girl is hiding her face. This study is actually done in the block of flats that I used to live in. Right? I encourage my students to do this because I thought it's worthwhile. And moreover, they take pictures that I can relate to. So, alright, so those are 3 pictures. Alright, and I think to add on to the kind of data we get from official statistics, I've also been collecting data, as you know, on the social stratification in Singapore. And this data which I'm showing is based on the survey I did in the year 2001. And then this is what I get, okay? Essentially what I did was I asked people to identify themselves, whether they are upper class, middle class, working class, or lower class. And I also asked them to tell me about their household budget situation, whether income greater than expenditure, income equals expenditure, or income less than expenditure. And I think the overall picture I get is that about 17% of Singapore population would claim that they have income less than expenditure. And you notice that even among upper class, middle class, and all that, right, you still get people who are spending more than they are making, right? And of course, it's worse among the lower class. Right, and I want you to know that these are self-identified lower class. Alright, this picture is even more interesting, okay? It's from the same survey, and I asked people from the different classes whether they think of themselves as well off, above average, or poor. Alright, the overall picture I get is that 10% claim to be poor in that survey. And even among the upper class, right, you find 12% who claim to be poor. Alright, and middle class 5%, working class 10%, and of course lower class is 47%. Alright, so in other words, poverty, I mean, could be a mentality, right? I mean, it may not reflect the actual objective condition, but it is something that is subjective, you know. So maybe, I mean, apart from measuring numbers, dollars and cents, who knows, we may even need to look at the subjective dimension, the perceived, whether they perceive themselves to be poor or not. So maybe that could also account for why, despite the so-called growing affluence we have in Singapore, right, we still have very unhappy people, and who eventually maybe decide not to vote for the ruling party, all right, as mentioned by Ambassador Pani this morning. All right, so I just want to mention a few things about welfare policy, and you notice that one of our welfare philosophy in Singapore is that it's not about redistribution, it's not about welfare, it's actually about sharing success. All right. In other words, we have inequality, but with people doing better and better, all right, hopefully the bottom will rise up. So in other words, it's more about poverty reduction rather than about reducing inequality. All right. And I think that's the important thing. Conceptually, that's what we should know. Okay, I'm just going through quite quickly on some of the welfare philosophy, and I'm almost done, right? Just another few slides. The welfare system in Singapore is about fairness and not about welfare, all right? And this is taken from a book written by Lee Kuan Yew. And it says it's about being equitable, that means equal to fair, right? Rather than not equal. It's about equitable and not equal. All right, we are not trying to become a more equal society. We are trying to become a more equitable society. All right, it's about leveling up, sharing success, and then we talk about progress package, resilience package. I don't think we need to deal with that. But I just want you to know the first two terms, right? Leveling up and sharing success. And then the focus is on creating a vibrant economy. It's about job creation and high value added jobs for that matter. Right? So it's about self-reliance, it's about family support and community support in that order. Alright? And less about government benefits or welfare benefits. And then, of course, there is some assistance, but it's for the truly needy, however you define it. Okay, truly needy and your low income. So these are the people who get your $1,350 that I mentioned earlier. And then, okay, I'm almost done. And then, of course, one question I always ask is any welfare for the middle class? And yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that later. So, okay, so if the focus is on creating a vibrant economy, right, and job creation, so what will happen is there's high long-term unemployment, which happens occasionally, in fact, quite frequently in the last decade. And then also there's multiple uses for the CPF, all right, so everything is dependent on the CPF. So the question here is that, would there be enough for retirement and healthcare for a graying population with a longer lifespan? That's something we have to consider. And okay, I understand this is not about. Okay, I just want to mention, highlight the third point, right? When we think of poverty, it's not just general poverty. Right? What about poverty in old age, as I like to emphasize a lot more? And I think poverty in old age tends to affect women more than men. So maybe it's not just age, but also gender. In that sense, there's a cross intersection between age and gender here. And then, okay, so right now, I think one of the policies is older people need to continue working, all right? So don't dream about retirement. In those days, retirement is 55, right? Or maybe younger, I don't know. But nowadays, we're talking about 62, 65, and I think you can still get a taxi license in Singapore at 70. All right, so the implication is that you ought to be still working, right? And then public assistance we have, but stringent means testing. And I think according to Ramesh, right, it's often very demeaning. You know, you really have to check and make sure that you are very, very poor before you're entitled to something. Okay, and then I think there's inadequate support for disabled, dependent, work injury cases. So this is something that, I mean, so far our measurement is all about normal, able people, right? What about the disabled? All right. I think this will be along the line. Okay, so some question which I want to pose is, can the shrinking family cope with its welfare responsibility? You know, the family, the household size is getting smaller. One person supporting a lot of other people. So can it still cope? You know? And then the other segment of the population we often have to look at is the sandwich generation. People who have to support their elderly as well as their adolescent children. You know, and you know college fees are not cheap, right? It's rising, and then medical cost is rising. So you get a whole generation that is caught in between. All right. So, and then there's also the maybe I don't have to mention that. Okay, let me just go on to the concluding remarks, right? I think poverty is certainly an issue, but I'm just wondering whether is inequality the real issue. I think in Singapore, the philosophy seems to be that we should take care of the bottom, make sure that the bottom rise up, rather than worry too much about extreme inequality, all right? And then, what other point do I need to make? Okay, let me just finish off with this interesting point from the recent general election, right? You know, in the recent general election, PMD actually made an apology, all right, which I think is broadcast and reported all over the world, right? And one of the things they say is that I think we need to take care of the middle class. You know, very often we think of the poor alone, the poor and the low income. But if Singapore is a middle class society, right, I think we need to take care of the middle class. And the middle class has its own anxiety, its own insecurity and all that. So maybe that's something that we also ought to consider. So not just the bottom end or worry about inequality, but the middle class society, because the majority of Singaporeans, and maybe some